Yes. So I also talked last week about concentration, and which is a really calm abiding, which is a very important preemptor to wisdom. Because if you don't have your mind stabilized in meditation, you can't kind of get insight. Yeah, because if you're off thinking about next week's shopping list, you can't realize emptiness, right? You're distracted, and you can't see the nature of your own mind. So there are, and the best way to develop calm abiding meditation, meditative stabilization, is calm abiding. And there are 9 stages of meditation. And you could just start with 20 minutes of breath meditation every day. And it really does change your life, because it slows down that period between seeing the object, having a reaction, before, like thinking before you speak, like when you're triggered, or when you perceive something, automatically sometimes we see something and we think it's a certain way, but later on when we talk to the person, we may realize that we may have misunderstood, or we may have projected our own issues onto their issues, but they may see it in a completely different way. So there is the first stage is placing the mind on the breath, or visualizing a Buddha or a blue flower or whatever we're meditating on. The second stage is just continually placing our mind on the object. It's like a little toddler, it just wanders away. And the third one is repeated placement, because the mind kind of wanders off here and there. And then the fourth one is close placement. And here we face the obstacles of mental wandering and mental excitation and mental dullness. Like some people, when they meditate, they start to go to sleep because the mind is not stimulated. So it's like, oh, well, nothing's confirming my existence here, so I might as well take a nap. And another one is like, God, I'm bored, so let me just fill this space up with thinking about something. And yeah, so that can be a problem. And the way to combat mental laziness or mental dullness when the mind gets very sleepy and dull is to think about death and impermanence, to get enough sleep, and to eat lighter food and wear lighter clothes. The way to overcome mental wandering, mental excitation, is to wear more heavy clothes, eat more heavy food, and also to remember why you're meditating. Remember the long-term goal of liberation. And even, liberation may seem like a pretty long way out goal for some people, but just know, like, when you meditate, you feel more well-being. You can feel states of mind that are just so sublime, so wonderful, that I would not have believed if anyone had told me before I meditated. So, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. Just try and see what happens. Because, a hungry person doesn't need more recipes. A hungry, starving person needs food, right? So no matter how much you study, no matter how many nice quotes you read, it's never going to overcome your suffering in the same way actually swallowing the medicine of Dharma and actually practicing it does, And then there is habituating, which means just continuously patchworking moments of mind awareness together. Because most of us, when we first begin, are lucky if we can meditate on one spot for half a minute. And as if you do long-term retreat, then it's those moments of clarity become clearer. You patch them together. And then you pacify. Stage 6 is you pacify mental wandering and mental dullness. Then thorough pacification. You're not too aggressive, but you're also not... like mindfulness has a few factors. Like one is the person at the door watching. There is the awareness, and then there is the person watching. What is my mind doing? So like about 75% of your mind is just presently relaxing, letting go, pleasantly abiding on the object of meditation. And maybe about 25% is just kind of watching, like the babysitter. Has the baby gone out the door? What's going on? Where's the baby? And bringing it back, applying the remedy for mental wandering and mental dullness. And then number 8 on the stages of the 9 stages of concentration in Tibetan Buddhism is entering samadhi. So most of us will probably never get to this point unless we actually do a long retreat. And that is like you get into a blissful state of meditation that you're not getting sensory input. You're in a very deep state of meditation, and it's quite blissful. And then there is and the mind is like cotton, it's like limpid and flexible and light and blissful. And then the final stage is single-pointedness of the worldly mind, which is the highest state of absorption an unenlightened being can have. And that, I guess, would be in Theravada probably entering into the 3rd or 4th jhana level of concentration. Doesn't matter too much that you know these things, but it is good to know what they are, and so you can measure where you are in your meditation. And it's also nice to just hear like what it could be like if you did retreat and you got into these states of mind, Single-pointedness of the samsaric mind is like you can meditate for a week and you don't come out. So, yeah, that's not most of us. But at the end of the day, you don't just need calm abiding. You need, I can't check out the time because, you need, like, if you compare the mind, the normal mind, it's got dust in it, it's got negative emotions, it's got desires and confusion and distraction. So it's like a dirty water with mud in it, and you shake it up and it's all cloudy. The mind can't see itself. It's not clear, So when in meditation, you let the mind settle, and there's that beautiful clarity in the water. And you see, actually, the nature of my mind is pure and clear from the very beginning. I'm actually, my nature is goodness. It was only what the Tibetans call adventitious defilements, or the illusory, temporary obscuration of negative emotions and self-grasping that caused these delusions to arise in my mind. I just had a bad trip, man. It was called birth and death. I suddenly lost my connection to the cosmos. I didn't see the sun in my tea, and like a bad dream, and when you meditate, you do start to see these kind of, the grip of self-grasping, because we do think of ourselves as separate, and we think of ourselves as this and permanent and the center of the universe, and we don't care too much. We have attachment or aversion or indifference based on this self, and based on that we create a whole bunch of karma, and we further lock ourselves into the wheel of birth and death, into the cycle of concretizing everything, and our the freshness of our mind reduces over time. We hold on to things longer, we become more and more weighed down by too much mental activity. Whereas when you meditate, you start to see, wow, things are impermanent, things can change. It doesn't have to be this way forever. Your mind opens up and you see thoughts come and go, suffering comes and goes. You don't need to be conditioned by that. You can taste the unconditioned, and you might find a solution to something because you're thinking outside the box. You're not so weighted down by this belief that you inherently exist. And there's relative emptiness and ultimate emptiness. So relative emptiness is, you exist, your feelings matter, you suffer, you experience good and bad things, you have a family, you have a job, you park the car in your driveway, it'll probably be there the next day. Cause and effect, you can say, that you live in the relative world, because a lot of people hear these teachings on luminous mind and emptiness, and they think, great, nothing I do matters, and they start to become dismissive of other people's suffering and other people's lived realities of especially of oppression. So many people, especially white middle class people, in Dharma centers will be like, well, just think positive and think more open and try to rest in the unconditioned. You know, when someone says, I experience racism, I experience poverty and sexism, and that's a problem. And they're like, it's just the way you're thinking. If you can just change the way you're thinking. But no matter how positive a black man thinks, he's probably more likely to be killed by police or falsely imprisoned simply because he's black, you know. And no matter how positively a woman thinks, she's still more likely to be physically attacked or raped than a man, you know. So we shouldn't use the idea of emptiness to dismiss other people's oppression. But what emptiness does do is give us compassion and give us a long-term view that I have suffering, but I am not my suffering. I have a past of trauma that I have to work through, but there is also something beyond that, you know, that opens up to a wider world. And also, you know, rather than becoming nihilistic and apathetic, you know, and really not caring about the world, you know, because everything's empty and the world doesn't matter, that's not the right understanding of emptiness. The understanding of emptiness actually makes us more socially responsible, because we see caring for the water is caring for myself. Caring for my neighbor, my community, also benefits me and creates well-being for me. You know, others are my second self. Caring for the earth is caring for myself. We see that there is a sacred connectedness, a web of life, and that we are part of that, you know, so that our small self, it's a limited view. Of course, we need to take care of our own mind and our own emotions and our own karma first, because you can't, a cup that is empty can't offer water, right? You have to fill up yourself. But emptiness is fullness, and therefore you see that social responsibility actually makes sense. But doing it with a mind that is not too concrete, like doesn't have this idea of oppressor, victim, you know, good and bad, because actually you see it's much more complex than that, you know, because hurt people hurt. You see usually people who, like I've been watching this series on YouTube called Soft White Underbelly, and it's so interesting because it's mostly about homeless people living on Skid Row in LA. And, you know, they're like drug addicts, sex workers, porn stars. And they're not talking about sex. They're just talking about how they ended up in that lifestyle, you know, how they ended up in addiction and how their life got out of control. And it's so real and raw. And what is the standard story with every child? There was something traumatic in their childhood. They didn't have a healthy attachment bond with someone, with a parent, and they found that love and that attachment bond with drugs instead, you know. And so to come out of that kind of addiction, there needs to be another source of nutriment or love, you know, that, or meaning, a connection to a higher source. You know, this is something Russell Brand has said quite often. And that's why community is also important in Buddhism, you know, connecting to a larger community, you know, that creates well-being. And that takes you beyond yourself. And like the more people you meet, the more diverse people you know, the more you understand that your point of view is only relative, that it's not ultimate truth. You know, just because you think you grew up eating rice doesn't mean it's right for everyone. Doesn't mean other people want it for breakfast. Or just because I grew up eating, you know, bacon and eggs for breakfast doesn't mean everyone wants that, you know. That's just one way. And you realize that everybody's coming from a very different point of view. And you also see that you can humanize the people who you perceive as the enemy. You can see what has led them to where they are. And therefore, hatred is no longer possible. Love is understanding. Without understanding, there can be no true love. So what are the signs of practice? You know, what are the signs of accomplishment that someone has realized a little bit of emptiness, you know, or that someone is really practicing the Dharma well? There is a desire to benefit others, not grasping too strongly at relative existence, a steady lessening of negative emotions. Take care, Hendrik. He's got another meeting. You know, these are the signs of accomplishment. But also, just meditating on compassion, we become dualistic, you know. There's a lot of Christians that do amazing work, actually. Amazing. They're much better than Buddhists at social justice work, you know. But there's often a certain sense of beating yourself up, like I must do this because I am unworthy and I am a sinner and I must win favor with God, you know. And that kind of point of view of beating yourself up can be quite not very sustainable for social work. You burn out. That's why you need to rest in the unconditioned, to come back to that state of wholeness. You know, that's why we need contemplation as part of social justice work. Just meditating on compassion, we're dualistic. And just meditating on emptiness without compassion can also make one apathetic to the suffering, to the real world lived experience of others. Yeah. And then how do we, actually the way we practice, when we practice one of the perfections, we can practice them all. For example, when we give, we should realize the emptiness of, or the lack of solid existence of, the one who is receiving, the one who is giving, and the object itself. Because there is this tendency to be very dualistic, like I'm the one who's giving, so I'm the good person here and you're the helpless one. You know, and I'm so good, I'm on a pedestal, and look at what I'm giving, aren't I good? Make sure I got a photo. Whereas when you realize, this could be me tomorrow, I could be homeless tomorrow. I've been homeless, you know. There was maybe a life where I was addicted to drugs or you know, discriminated against, you know. So I've been there, I could be there again. We're all the same. Therefore, I have compassion for where you are. You know, I'm not better than you. Just my circumstances are temporarily better than yours. You know, it's not a matter of deserving or undeserving. It's a matter that I see that giving to you helps us both. You know, and you're providing me an opportunity to make good karma. So I should be grateful to you too. That is how you give with the perfection of wisdom. You know, and when you give, you practice ethics. Like you don't give something, like you don't give alcohol to an alcoholic. You don't give something that is harmful, like drugs. Unless, obviously, like medicine is different to drugs, you know, pain management or whatever. You practice patience because people are messed up. People are confused. You don't expect too much of an outcome. You just give without expectation. You practice joyous effort because, you know, it's tiring sometimes giving. It's hard, especially if you're in a caring profession. Anyone who's raised a child or, you know, worked in a nursing home with dementia patients knows all about patience and joyous effort because both are required in great measure. So these are the other perfections involved in giving. And then also in generosity, there is mindfulness and wisdom. Mindfulness means when you're giving, being mindful that the gift, the giver, and the person receiving it are empty of a true, solid, permanent existence. You know, they're conditioned, and seeing interbeing. And in that way, it's sealed with emptiness. There is no attachment. There is no expectation. There is just this perfect act of communion of us being together in that moment, connected to everything. In fact, there is a beautiful interbeing present every day in the way the bees take the pollen and fertilize other plants, and the way that the leaves take in the gas and the heat and nourish the tree, and then they fall to the ground and nourish the tree in the other way, you know, and the sap and the whole cycle of nature. You know, there is a beautiful symmetry and sacred web in that, and we are also no different. Yeah, so this is kind of what I have to say about emptiness. You know, it's very freeing to know that your mind, what you think of as permanent, is not as solid as you think it is. And also to not identify. See, there's a very big difference between disassociation and understanding emptiness, you know, or spiritual bypassing and understanding emptiness, because understanding emptiness is understanding fullness, and that's embodiment. That's feeling and processing what's gone on, but it's also seeing have with spaciousness, like feeling and letting go, you know, processing, understanding it's not going to be this way forever. Whereas disassociation and spiritual bypassing is more a form of nihilism and denial. So there is a big difference between those two things. One makes you apathetic and one makes you compassionate, engaged, and enlivened. I hope you can see the difference. And you know, when it comes to engagement in the world, I'd say Goldilocks Buddhism. What does that mean? The middle path. Not too much in one extreme or the other. Remember, she said not too hot, not too cold, not too big, not too small. Right? Just right. So you engage, but you engage just right in terms of the level of your capacity, your resources, your energy, your realization. And in meditation, the same, just right. Like, if you're capable of more, do more. And if you're not capable of a lot, do as much as you can. Just right. Goldilocks Buddhism, middle path. So does anyone have any questions? I will just, you could put up your hand, or otherwise you could write it in the chat. And if you just put up your hand, I'll unmute you. Nobody has any questions or comments? Yes, Saskia, I will unmute you. Why is it not working?
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted, yes.
Okay, yeah, hi. I'm just curious about when you're referring to disassociation, if you could talk more about that, because from my understanding of disassociation, it can be a response to trauma when people disassociate, not by choice. It's like sort of something that's happening in their system or their body, but maybe this is a different kind of disassociation. And from that process, which, you know, when someone's really experiencing something that perhaps their body's adapted to survive, and they leave their body in a sort of moment of disassociation, how is that different, or how is that the same as to what you're referring to?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of the spiritual bypassing, which is using spiritual ideas to deny emotions, pain, trauma, and the lived experience and oppression of others and yourself. So actually, it's very similar. And a lot of people who are in a lot of pain come to Buddhism and think, oh, great, feelings are I'm empty, my feelings are impermanent, and therefore they don't matter, and I don't have to feel them. I can just get blissed out on peace, and I don't have to deal with all those issues. You know, oh, I've got sexual issues, I have a problem with men, I'll be celibate, you know. And it's good because Buddhism says give up desire anyway, the body is bad. So they're taking those ideas and twisting them to deny their pain, you know, and that's really problematic, because then they come to a Buddhist community and they have to deal with people, they have to deal with emotions, and instead of actually dealing with those feelings and emotions, they'll just say to people, they'll externalize it, and they'll say, you know, I don't want women around because I've got issues. Like, they're not going to say I've got issues with desire or I've got a painful bond with women. They're just going to say women are a problem, so we don't want them in the monastery. When other people come to them with anger, when there's some abuse in the sangha and someone expresses anger about that, they'll demonize the person for expressing a natural response to abuse. And because they're denying their own capacity to express normal emotions, because they're using peace to numb themselves. And they use spiritual ideas to say racism doesn't matter because everything's empty. You know, gender inequality doesn't matter because you have Buddha nature. Can you see what I mean? It's they're using Buddhism to numb themselves instead of to see interconnectedness and the part they play in oppression and to feel their feelings. They just want to bliss out because they're in pain. So they're using it to numb themselves, and they use the idea of emptiness and the idea of impermanence to deny their own emotions and the emotions of others. And that's a response to trauma.
Yeah. Well, that's quite heartbreaking just to think about a little bit, but I have experienced that with certain people that I've met. Yeah, so thank you for elaborating.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a huge problem in Buddhism. I mean, I did it for the first few years because I was in a lot of pain.
Mm.
But I think sooner or later, the Dharma brings stuff up. So actually, the Dharma is not really about just being happy or peaceful. Those are a side effect. And I think it's okay to numb some really big pain out for a while, and you need to connect with some peace and some goodness before you're able to hold space for all the baggage you've got. But that can't be a long-term plan. That's why I like calm abiding and then insight. So, part of becoming spiritually mature is unpacking those issues in a time and a way that you can process them. Because some people have more baggage than others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? No? Okay. No, nothing about anything going on in the world or what you're going through, anything you want to share? Nobody? You're all... Oops. So I've got my YouTube camera on as well. You're all solitary realizers and you don't need to discuss anything. Cool. Well, I wish you joy on this, day of Buddha's awakening. And it's beautiful to light some candles, burn some incense, do some meditation, maybe watch a teaching from your favorite teacher on YouTube. And there's a really beautiful book. If you want to connect with the Buddha as a human being, as a very humanized person, as a compassionate person and how he behaved in the world, there is a beautiful book called Old Path, White Clouds, which is a wonderful thing to read, by Thich Nhat Hanh on probably you can get it online, or maybe you could get a secondhand book on, but it's a beautiful book, Old Path, White Clouds. And it's nice to remember, the Buddha as a human being, as a person, as a incredibly compassionate person. Because sometimes it's not easy to see. We see this gold statue and he doesn't seem very human. He doesn't seem like he was ever once like us. But the first time the Buddha generated bodhicitta, or the mind of compassion, was when he was pulling a chariot in hell and a demon beat his friend to death, and he generated a mind of compassion. That's when he started the spiritual path, So, and also people say, well, the Buddha left his wife, he wasn't very kind, or he had some issues, But actually, the Buddha's wife had been his wife in many lifetimes. And they'd made an agreement that when he wanted to seek final liberation, that she would let him go as an act of love. And he promised, as soon as I attain awakening, I will come back and share it with you and my child. And he actually did that. He shared the Dharma with his stepmother, his wife, his father, his son. And with the exception of his father, they all ordained, and they all became arhats. They all became liberated. So he actually didn't abandon his family, but what he did was, and he didn't run away from responsibility, he was leaving not just for himself, but to find a solution to birth and death for all of humanity. So it wasn't just the same as like some kind of dad who's dodging alimony, abandoning his family. It wasn't like that, and it was an agreement that he and Yashodhara had made over many lifetimes. So, and the way he behaved with others, when there was a sick monk who all the other monks had abandoned, and the Buddha chastised them for abandoning this sick monk, he said, we are monks and nuns, don't have family, we must be each other's family. When there was a time of, when a king was going to slaughter all of his relatives, he sat under a dead tree meditating, where he knew that king would see him. And the king said, why are you sitting under a dead tree? There is no shade. And the Buddha said, this tree is the tree of my homeland and my people, and it nourishes me. That is why I sit here, because every person loves their family and their clan. And the king kind of got the message, that slaughtering the Buddha's clan would not be a righteous act, would not lead to long-term beneficial result for him. and he went back. He didn't slaughter the Sakyans on that particular occasion, although he did later on. But, you know, when the Buddha could intervene, also when the Buddha, there was a Dalit, and so-called person of untouchable caste, you know, and the Buddha accepted that person into the sangha, into the monastic community, which was a very radical thing 2,600 years ago, because these people weren't even seen as human at that time. They were so horribly oppressed by the caste system. You know, so the Buddha in so many ways, and he also, after some debate, accepted women into the monastic community, you know. So in so many ways, the Buddha was a humanist, and we should see him as this just and compassionate force that is present in all of us. So I hope you have a wonderful evening or morning, whatever, wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. And it's been a pleasure to spend an hour with you. So all the best. May you be well and happy and safe, and may there be peace in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sukhi hontu. And if you're able to donate $10 for this class, I really appreciate it, because this is my source of income. The monastery website is on the Facebook page. And if you can't, that's okay too. So all the best. Thank you. See you next week.
Yes.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.